Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving straight into the absolutely fascinating, totally hidden world of plant reproduction. We're going to see exactly how a flower transforms into a new seed. It's this incredible journey happening all around us, literally every single day, and yet so much of it goes down entirely out of sight. Let's get into it.
So let's start with a massive evolutionary puzzle, right? Think about it. If you're an animal, you can just roam around to find a mate. But how do completely stationary organisms, plants rooted firmly into the ground, manage the incredibly dynamic feat of sexual reproduction? Well, it turns out plants have engineered some of the most ingenious biological mechanisms on Earth to solve this exact problem.
Section 1. Anatomy of a flower, the reproductive stage.
Okay, so to understand the action, we really need to look at the stage where it all happens. Notice the 4 primary layers, or whorls, arranged on this fleshy base we call the receptacle. We've got the outer 2 whorls. Those are the protective green sepals that shield the bud, and, of course, the attractive petals. But the real magic? That happens in the inner 2 whorls, the absolutely crucial reproductive organs.
Let's define the key players here, starting with the male part, the androecium. This is made up of stamens, and you can think of each stamen as a miniature production center. It's got this tiny stalk called the filament, holding up the anther at the top. And that anther, that is what actually produces and bears the male gametes, packed safely inside pollen grains. And right next to it is the counterpart, the female whorl, known as the gynoecium or pistil. Notice the incredible architecture here. The sticky stigma sits perfectly positioned at the very top, essentially acting as a landing pad to catch any incoming pollen. Below that, you've got a slender stalk called the style, which leads straight down to the swollen base, the ovary, and that's what houses the ovules. Section 2. The pollination journey, moving pollen to stigma.
So the absolutely crucial point to remember here is that sexual reproduction just cannot happen without pollination. We're talking about the literal journey of the pollen grain from the anther of one flower to the stigma of the same or another flower. Without this critical transfer, the entire process just stops dead in its tracks. Now, to achieve this transfer, plants rely on 2 very different strategies. They can either keep it local with self-pollination, which happens within the exact same flower or plant without needing any outside help, or they can outsource the job with cross-pollination. Now, cross-pollination requires external agents and way more pollen because, let's face it, there's a lot of inevitable wastage blowing around in the wind. Plus, it generally takes a lot more visual flair to attract those outside agents.
Which brings us to Section 3, matchmakers, agents of pollination.
Let's dive into that flare we just mentioned. What you're seeing here represents 2 vastly different evolutionary bets. On the left, you've got a brightly colored, large flower flashing a literal scented neon sign to attract insects like bees. But on the right, that's a purely utilitarian, small, white, and frankly dull structure of a wind-pollinated plant, like rice or grass. It's relying purely on the breeze, so it doesn't need to dress up to impress anyone. And every single characteristic of these flowers serves as a highly specific tool. Insect-pollinated flowers are offering up sweet nectar rewards, and they have sticky stigmas so the pollen easily brushes off a visiting bee. Wind-pollinated flowers, though, they skip the nectar entirely. Instead, they produce massive, massive quantities of incredibly light, dry pollen, and they use large, feathery stigmas that act like giant nets to catch that airborne pollen as it blows past. But humans can act as agents too, through a really fascinating process called artificial hybridization. By meticulously removing the stamens from a flower, tying a muslin bag around it to prevent any rogue natural pollen from crashing the party, and then manually dusting it with carefully selected pollen, we can actually combine the absolute best traits from 2 entirely different parent plants. We're talking things like disease resistance and higher crop yields. It's a real game changer. Section 4, fertilization and new life. Okay, so once the pollen successfully lands on the stigma, whether by wind, bee, or human hand, the most microscopic, dramatic part of our story begins. Look at the physical tube the pollen grain creates here. Once deposited, that tiny grain actually swells up and literally grows a pollen tube deep, deep down through the flower's style to deliver its payload directly into the ovary. Let's break down this sequence because it is truly incredible. It's a literal race. That tube grows, reaching the ovules inside the ovary. Then, the male gamete travels all the way down this tube until it finally reaches the female egg cell inside the ovule. And when they fuse together, boom, fertilization is complete and a brand new single-celled zygote is officially formed. Section 5. Seeds, fruits, and germination. The final result. With fertilization complete, the flower's petals fall away, and notice exactly what happens next. The swollen ovary of the flower literally ripens into the fleshy fruit we eat, like the thick wall of this papaya, which is designed to protect the seeds from extreme conditions. Meanwhile, those fertilized ovules resting securely inside, they harden and develop into the actual seeds. Now, if we take just one of those seeds and peel back its protective coat, we find the zygote has developed into a dormant baby plant called an embryo. It's neatly packed between fleshy cotyledons, and it's fully equipped with an embryonal axis. That axis contains a tiny root called a radicle and a tiny shoot called a plumule. The whole shebang is right there in miniature. So, how does this baby plant finally wake up from its nap? Through germination. All that tiny, dormant embryo needs is the right mix of water to soak up, sufficient oxygen, and a suitable temperature. Once those exact conditions are met, the radicle pushes down to become the root system, the plumule pushes up to become the shoot, and life begins anew. It's absolutely incredible to think about, isn't it? This massive, complex biological journey, from the specific shape of a petal to the microscopic race of a pollen tube, is entirely paused and perfectly packed into every single tiny seed you see. They are scattered everywhere beneath our feet, just waiting for a drop of water to wake them up and start this epic, ancient story all over again. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. And next time you see a flower or eat a piece of fruit, ask yourself, how many endless cycles of life are waiting right there in the palm of your hand?